Sometimes I just want to play a game as a pure powerhouse, like an unhinged villain living out an ultra evil power fantasy. So these are the games that actually let you be the monster, laughing as you tear through the world or leave it in ruins. Let's get into some of the best titles where playing the bad guy feels incredible. Man, the way I would just tear things apart in Prototype was undeniably fun. It was one of my absolute favorite games to just mess around in, largely because consuming people and stealing their identities never got old. The combat is a fast-paced, fluid flow of pure destruction. You can kill a guy, steal his skin to wear his form, pick up his gun, empty the magazine, throw the empty gun at someone else, grab that guy, hurl him at a nearby car, and seamlessly vault over the wreckage without breaking stride. You are fighting helicopters, soldiers, zombies, and massive monsters. The beauty is the choice. You can slip in and out without anyone knowing you were there, or you can wipe out an entire base in 6 seconds with extreme violence. The open world is about the size of a classic Spider-Man game, and getting around is never a chore. You run, jump, and glide at ridiculously high speeds. What really stands out is the map control system. The infected monsters and the military are in a constant tug of war for a devastated city. You can target specific groups to weaken them, ensuring bigger, tougher fights with the dominant faction later. Even if you do nothing, the factions fight each other and organically change the landscape, which is an awesome feature I wish modern games still utilized. Story missions follow a familiar template, tailing helicopters, infiltrating government facilities, or waging all-out war against hives. It is varied enough to stay relatively fresh. The real hook, however, is the power progression. You start out having to rely on timing and stealth, but eventually you become a walking terror, effortlessly shaping the battlefield. The powers are strong, but balanced. You need to rapidly switch between skills and learn their unique combos, because if you get careless, the sheer numbers and the fast, fair enemy aggression will overwhelm you. My only real complaint comes down to the traversal mechanics on occasion. It has those classic Spider-Man or early Assassin's Creed gripes where you get caught on the edges of walls, or your character decides to climb in a direction you definitely did not intend. Overall, the concept itself is fantastic, and I still remember it fondly. Obviously, the graphics aren't going to blow your mind today since the game is over 15 years old, but if you can snag this for 10 or 20 bucks, jump on it. It is absolutely worth experiencing for yourself. Tyranny. You play as a standard hero who has to save the day. Tyranny completely throws that whole idea out the window. In this game, the massive war between good and evil already went down. And guess what? The bad guys actually won. You do not play some underdog fighting for freedom. You play as a fate binder. Think of it like being the top judge, jury, and executioner for the Overlord's winning army. You are the absolute law, and whatever you say goes, even if it means ending a lot of lives. What makes Tyranny so wild is that you are not just running around causing random cartoonish chaos. It is way colder than that. You are enforcing the Overlord's brutal rules on a broken world. If a bunch of refugees camp in the wrong spot, you have the total authority to just crush them. You can betray peace talks, execute anyone who looks at you wrong, and the game actually rewards you for being ruthless instead of slapping your wrist for doing the wrong thing.
Every volume of the Chronicle to the Edict of Fire, then violate the integrity of
A huge part of the game is babysitting two massive factions in your own evil army. You have the super strict disfavored generals on one side and the absolute psycho Scarlet Chorus on the other. You have to handle their drama, pick favorites, and eventually you can even betray everyone and take all the power for yourself. The developers built a game where playing the good guy basically isn't an option. You're constantly pushed into situations where every single choice leaves a pile of bodies, so you just have to pick the flavor of cruelty you like best. If you want a deep RPG where NPCs are legitimately terrified of you and you get to rule with an iron fist, you seriously need to check this one out.
As the final conquest draws near,
You lie, cheat, and steal, twisting everything around you for your bottomless ambition.
Overlord. If you want a game that doesn't take itself too seriously but still lets you be the absolute worst, Overlord is a total classic. You literally wake up as this massive, heavily armored, Sauron-looking dude. The previous Overlord got wiped out years ago, and now it is your turn to rebuild your giant evil tower and terrorize the local fantasy lands. The funniest part of the game is the setting. The so-called heroes who killed the last Overlord have all completely let themselves go and become corrupted by their own power. The main halfling hero turned into a massive glutton who hoards all the food from the peasants, and the paladin is a total fanatic. So you are technically going around killing off the good guys, but they are all terrible people anyway, which makes taking them down super satisfying. But the main reason this game is so fun is that you don't even have to do all the dirty work yourself. You command this massive horde of chaotic gremlin-like minions who are obsessed with you. They will literally do whatever you want. You just point, and a swarm of them will rush in to smash up a peaceful village, steal all the gold, chug the locals' beer, and put pumpkins on their heads as armor. As you play, you get different types of minions to mix things up. You have your standard brown fighters, red ones that throw fireballs, green assassins, and blue healers. It is insanely fun to just stand back on a hill, swing your weapon, and watch your army absolutely wreck a colorful, peaceful fantasy town. You get to choose whether to slaughter the innocent villagers or just beat them up enough that they start worshipping you. If you want to feel like a big evil boss managing a squad of destructive little monsters, this game nails the feeling perfectly. Destroy all humans. Picture landing in the middle of 1950s America as a highly irritable, sarcastic alien with a massive superiority complex. You play as Crypto, and your agenda is incredibly simple. Wipe out humanity, harvest their brainstems, and cause absolute havoc across the globe. The game completely drops you into a cheesy sci-fi B-movie, and you are the star menace. You kick things off by messing with clueless rural farmers. You can read their minds, throw their cows across fields using telekinesis, and generally terrorize the local county. The escalation is incredibly fast and extremely violent. Before you know it, you are going toe-to-toe with the entire United States military and leveling major city blocks. Your weapon wheel is totally unhinged and designed for pure mayhem. You start with the Zap-O-Matic, an electricity gun that fries people down to glowing green skeletons. Then you get the Extractor, a weapon that aggressively yanks out human brains so you can collect them for upgrades. And obviously, you have the classic Anal Probe, which sends enemies running around in pure panic before completely neutralizing them. Once you get bored of wrecking stuff on foot, you simply beam up into your flying saucer. The saucer sections let you use a massive death rate of vaporized government buildings, flip army tanks, and turn entire neighborhoods to ash from the sky. Because every human you encounter is a walking, talking 1950s stereotype, you never feel guilty about turning them to dust. The dialogue is hilarious, and the gameplay loop is pure, chaotic fun, where the whole point is laughing while humanity runs for its life. The recent remakes also gave the graphics a massive upgrade, so all that mindless alien destruction looks absolutely gorgeous. Evil Genius. Evil Genius is straight up a satirical spy-fi version of being a supervillain. The original 2004 classic or the newer sequel, Evil Genius 2 World Domination, both of them absolutely nail the fantasy of being a megalomaniacal Bond villain. It's a lair builder, management game, kind of like the old Dungeon Keeper games, but instead of a fantasy dungeon, you are hollowing out an island to build your secret base. It's a pretty simple setup. You pick your genius, they all have their own unique abilities and perks, and your main goal is literally just global domination. You want to build a doomsday device. The core loop is basically managing your base, training a huge workforce of criminal minions, and sending them out on the world map to pull off acts of infamy. You're literally doing stuff like kidnapping the governor of Maine or selling the British royal family to fund your evil plans. But as you generate heat, the forces of justice start sending investigators and super agents to snoop around your island, and that is where the game just gets insanely satisfying. You have to defend your lair, but you don't just use brute force. You build these these massive, ridiculous trap networks. You can combo traps together, like hitting a good doer with a pinball bumper that bounces them right into a Venus spy trap. Sitting back and watching some discount super spy waltz into your base, only to get bounced around a hallway of traps before getting banished for good, man, it hits differently. It is definitely for a specific type of player who likes base management, but there is this really cool progression where you start with a tiny corridor and a couple of minions, and after a few hours, you transition into a fully operational base with hundreds of goons on the payroll. You recruit powerful henchmen to act as your enforcers, you display stolen loot around the base to boost your minions' stats, and you try to keep everything hidden behind an innocuous hotel front. This is just a good-ass game. Being the mastermind pulling the strings from a fancy desk chair while the world burns is just a really fun vibe.
Bend your leg.
Manhunt. I know you technically do not play as a traditional villain in Manhunt. Technically, you are an anti-hero, but let's be real for a second. You control James Earl Cash. You are a convicted murderer sitting on death row, and the stuff you are forced to do in this game is straight up villainous. Rockstar dropped this back in 2003, and honestly, playing it today, it is still one of the most grimy, uncomfortable, and unapologetically brutal games ever made. The setup is wild. You get saved from a lethal injection by this sick, twisted director named Starkweather, but your reward is being forced to star in his underground snuff film. Your co-stars? Just roaming gangs of absolute psychopaths, and you have to brutally hunt them down if you want to earn your freedom. The reason this game fits the list so perfectly is that you never actually feel like a hero trying to survive. You feel like the slasher in a horror movie. You are the monster lurking in the shadow. You're hiding in the dark, just waiting for some gang member to walk by so you can take them out with whatever piece of garbage you found on the ground. A plastic bag, a shard of glass, a piece of wire. The execution system is what completely sells that feeling. You sneak up on a guy, and the longer you hold the attack button down, the more brutal the kill gets. The targeting reticle changes from white to yellow to red. If you hold out for that red, gruesome execution, man, it is intense. And the crazy part is, the game actually rewards you for being a complete sadist. Starkweather is watching everything through the security cameras, talking in your ear through an earpiece, and he gets super excited when you pull off the nastiest kills. The whole presentation with the dirty VHS static, the heavy breathing, the weird pulsing synth soundtrack, it all makes you feel kind of gross playing it. But mechanically, the stealth is super solid. When you manage to clear out a whole area of hunters just by picking them off one by one from the dark, banging on walls to draw them out, and using their panic against them, you get this terrifying, powerful rush of being the ultimate predator. You might be fighting people who are technically worse than you, but you are still unleashing absolute hell, and it makes for just a really good-ass game. Hatred. No mistaking anything good about your intentions in here. I remember when this game came out back in 2015 and everybody was completely losing their minds over it. It was insanely controversial. You don't play as an anti-hero or some misunderstood guy backed into a corner trying to survive. You play as this nameless, long-haired dude who just flat out hates humanity. And he grabs his weapons and steps outside to go on a massive, violent crusade. It is extremely edgy, and it is definitely for a specific type of player, but as a twin-stick shooter, it actually has some really solid stuff going on. The whole game is presented in this really gritty, black and white isometric view. The only colors that really pop are things like the red of the blood, the orange explosions, or the flashing lights of the police sirens. It gives the whole thing this super bleak, oppressive atmosphere. And the destruction physics are honestly wild. You can blow holes through walls, destroy fences, and basically level entire houses while you get into massive shootouts with the cops and the SWAT teams. Mechanically, it plays like a really aggressive arcade shooter, but what makes it feel so uniquely villainous is how you heal. There are no health packs lying around. If you take damage, the only way to get your health back is to walk up to an injured person or a cop and perform this brutal close-up execution. It forces you to play completely ruthlessly to keep your run going. I'm not gonna sit here and say it has some deep, thought-provoking story because it totally doesn't. It is pure, unfiltered chaos. But if you enjoy that top-down, heavy action stuff where you just cause absolute destruction and deal with the environment getting ripped apart around you, it is a crazy experience. Dungeon Keeper is one of those games where the entire pitch is basically what if you were the final boss, and somehow even decades later, very few games have really done it this well. I think what always stood out to me about Dungeon Keeper is that it doesn't just tell you you're evil. Plenty of games do that. Plenty of games let you make bad choices or play some morally gray anti-hero. Dungeon Keeper fully commits to the bit. The game doesn't want you to save anybody, it doesn't want you to restore peace to the kingdom. You're the monster living underneath the kingdom. You're the thing heroes are supposed to stop. And that's what makes it so satisfying. You start out underground, carving out this giant evil lair, and immediately the game flips a lot of fantasy conventions on their head. Normally in a fantasy strategy game, you're building castles, training noble knights, protecting your people. Here, you're digging out torture chambers, prisons, graveyards, and hatcheries. You're creating a workplace that would probably get shut down by every government in existence. It's incredible. The thing I always loved is how hands-on being evil feels. You're not some distant ruler looking at a map. You're literally grabbing creatures with a giant demonic hand and throwing them around your dungeon. If your minions aren't working fast enough, you can slap them. If they're unhappy, you can slap them. If they're fighting each other, you can slap them. The solution to almost every problem in Dungeon Keeper seems to involve physical workplace abuse, which is horrible, but it's also exactly the kind of dark comedy the game thrives on. And that's really the secret sauce here. Dungeon Keeper isn't trying to be edgy in a modern way. It's got this mischievous sense of humor running through everything. The narrator sounds like he's enjoying every terrible thing you're doing. Your dungeon is filled with creatures that look like they'd be the final encounter in another game. Trolls, warlocks, bile demon, vampires, horned reapers. You're building an army entirely out of nightmare fuel. Then the heroes show up, and this is where the fantasy flips become really fun. Normally when you play a strategy game, heroes are your strongest units. They're the people you're rooting for. In Dungeon Keeper, heroes are basically pests. You see a group of noble knights marching into your dungeon, and your immediate reaction is, oh great, these idiots again. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a heavily armored paladin enter your dungeon thinking he's going to save the day, only to immediately wander into a room full of traps, get beaten unconscious by monsters, dragged off to prison, and eventually converted to your side. It's cartoonishly evil, but that's exactly why it works. The game constantly reinforces this feeling that you're corrupting an entire fantasy world. You're not defending against evil, you are the evil spreading across the map. Every mission is essentially another step in turning a peaceful kingdom into your personal nightmare kingdom. What also makes playing the villain feel amazing is the progression. Your dungeon starts as a tiny hole in the ground, but by the end, you're managing this sprawling underground empire. Creatures are training, researching spells, manufacturing traps, mining gold. There's always this feeling that you're becoming something bigger and more dangerous. And unlike a lot of modern villain protagonists who end up secretly being misunderstood heroes, Dungeon Keeper never really backs down. The game understands why you're here. You're here because it's fun to be the bad guy for once. Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 is a game that I've always found fascinating because it delivers on a fantasy that surprisingly few big-budget games ever let you experience. We spend so much time in games fighting the Dark Lord, storming the castle, defeating the ultimate evil, but how often do you actually get to be that guy? Not some anti-hero. Not some misunderstood rogue, the actual Dracula. And that's really what makes Lords of Shadow 2 such a memorable fit for a villain list. The thing is, when the game starts, Dracula isn't at the height of his power. He's broken, he's weakened, he's tired. He's been around for centuries, carrying the weight of everything he's done, and he's basically just done with existence. But even in that state, there's still this underlying feeling that you're controlling something incredibly dangerous. You're not some random warrior working your way up. You're playing as the most feared creature in the entire world. And I think that's what the game nails better than anything else. A lot of games tell you you're powerful. Lords of Shadow 2 wants you to feel like you're a legend people whisper about. Every time somebody mentions Dracula, there's this sense that they're talking about an unstoppable force of nature rather than a person. You're the monster from the stories, the nightmare that survived when everyone else thought it was dead. Then, as you start reclaiming your abilities, the game really leans into that fantasy. You're draining blood from enemies, you're ripping through armies, you're teleporting around battlefields, you're wielding weapons that feel almost supernatural in their brutality. By the time you're fully upgraded, combat starts feeling less like a struggle and more like a predator playing with its food. And that's where the villain aspect becomes really satisfying. In most action games, you're the underdog, you're fighting impossible odds. you're surviving against stronger enemies. Here, there are moments where it feels like the enemies are surviving against you. Soldiers rush you with everything they've got, and you're just dismantling them with centuries of accumulated supernatural power. I always love that feeling of entering a fight and realizing that you are the thing everyone should be afraid of. The visual design helps a lot too. Dracula isn't some cackling cartoon villain. He looks exhausted, ancient, dangerous. There's a weight to his presence. Every cutscene reinforces the idea that this is a character who has shaped history through violence and tragedy. When he walks into a room, people react accordingly. Carrion. Playing as the monster is such a rare, cool concept that you hardly ever see in games. It is one of the few games that managed to completely hold my attention all the way through last year. The movement is easily the thing that makes this game stand apart. There is nothing else like it anywhere. You are maneuvering a gigantic, amorphous alien blob through tight spaces like air vents and sewer tunnels, but the gameplay is incredibly fast, fluid, and responsive. It genuinely feels like you are controlling a non-human entity that naturally takes the path of least resistance for maximum speed. The way the monster writhes and moves is just amazing. The sense of power you get when you're about to clear out a room of nervous armed mercenaries and scientists is invigorating, but the game balances this perfectly. You aren't overpowered. You can actually die to bullets pretty easily if you just try to blindly rampage, which forces you to use your abilities and figure out creative ways to kill. And the blood and screaming never get old. The game slowly drips in new abilities so the gameplay never gets stale. Right when you think you need a change of pace, you get a deadly new upgrade. My favorite is parasitism. Turning enemies into puppets and forcing them to kill each other is absolutely mental. The puzzles are also really well done. They aren't overly common, but they hit a sweet spot where they make you feel like a learning, fledgling monster without ever making you feel totally stuck. The world variety is a bit small, mostly sticking to industrial areas, forests, and labs, but it changes just enough that I didn't mind. I also appreciate that the game makes it clear when you've fully explored a level, so it doesn't waste your time even if the lack of side objectives feels a little underutilized. Now for my biggest issue, the complete lack of a map and general guidance. I get that it makes sense lore-wise, but gameplay-wise it can get really confusing. The game hardly explains anything to you. I didn't even realize there was a central hub connecting the levels until I was halfway through the game. So yeah, it's a decent game with some caveats. The Suffering, 2004. This one is an absolute throwback from 2004, but it still holds up because the atmosphere is incredibly raw and brutal. You play as Torque, a hardened death row inmate who just arrived at Abbott State Penitentiary after being convicted of murdering his ex-wife and kids. The kicker is, Torque completely blacked out during the murders, so neither you nor he actually knows if he did it. Almost the second you get locked in your cell, the entire prison is completely overrun by literal demons, and it is entirely up to you how you want to handle the chaos. While you are technically trying to survive and escape the island, the game gives you total freedom to be an absolute psychopath. You are stranded in this massive, crumbling prison with terrifying creatures that represent different methods of execution, like guys with needles in their eyes for lethal injection, or monsters made of rifles for the firing squad. The crazy part is that you can easily choose to be worse than all of them. The morality system completely lets you off the leash. If you see a terrified guard or a helpless inmate begging for their life behind a locked door, you can just execute them right on the spot and take their gear. The combat is heavy, bloody, and super satisfying, but the real villain power trip kicks in when your insanity meter fills up. When you max it out, Torque rips his own skin apart and transforms into this massive, terrifying beast. In this monster form, you can tear through demons, guards, and prisoners alike with single brutal swipes. The game tracks every single terrible thing you do, and if you embrace the violence and murder everyone you come across, Torque's appearance slowly becomes more demonic. It is a gritty, incredibly dark psychological horror game that lets you embrace the absolute worst side of human nature, and getting the evil ending is incredibly satisfying. Vampyr. Picture playing a brilliant surgeon who just got back from the front line of World War I, only to wake up in a mass grave as a newly turned vampire. That is exactly how Vampyr starts. You are dropped right into the middle of 1918 London while the Spanish flu is wiping out the city. The entire premise is brilliant because you are supposed to be a doctor who saves lives, but you now have this overwhelming monstrous thirst for human blood. The game technically gives you the option to be a complete pacifist and never kill a single innocent civilian, but it actively makes your life miserable if you do. If you try to play the good guy, you will constantly be underleveled and the boss fights will absolutely wreck you. The fastest, easiest way to unlock all your terrifying supernatural powers, like boiling your enemy's blood, teleporting through shadows, and ripping people apart with shadow claws, is to feed on the local citizens. This is where the villain role gets incredibly dark and personal. You do not just run around biting random nameless people. Every single NPC has a name, a backstory, friends, and secrets. You actually spend time talking to them, investigating their lives, and even crafting medicine to cure their colds or fatigue. But you are not healing them out of the kindness of your heart. Curing an NPC literally purifies their bloodstream, meaning they give you a massive boost in experience points when you finally decide to eat them. You are basically farming human beings. When you're ready, you use your vampire hypnosis to mesmerize a citizen, walk them away from their friends into a dark, foggy alley, and completely drain them. It is brutal, and the consequences are entirely on you. If you get too greedy and eat too many people in one neighborhood, the local health level plummets. The district completely collapses, everyone dies or mutates, and the streets are overrun by grotesque monsters. Being the bad guy here is a massive power trip, but it is deeply psychological, making every kill feel incredibly heavy and completely intentional.